You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 10th of July 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Briefing, sponsored by ADIS. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting to you live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's programme. Ukraine suffers another night of record strikes from Russia, but are the US and other allies preparing to unite and defend Ukraine once again? We'll have the latest from the Ukraine Recovery Conference in Rome. After that, we'll head to a region of the world watching Ukraine closely. That would be Taiwan, which is launching its annual exercises preparing for the event of a Chinese invasion and calling out China's efforts to enter its airspace. We'll also head to the Goodwood Festival of Speed here in the UK. And finally, it is the Global Countdown Thursday on The Briefing, as ever with our very own Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Ciao, Fernando.
Ciao, Chris. Today we're going to look at the best songs in Italy this summer.
All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. Ukraine has suffered record barrages of overnight drone and missile strikes from Russia this week, but Moscow's fierce attacks may once again be turning the global tide against it, and more significantly that of Washington. The Pentagon is once again backing Ukraine's weapons requests. The US Congress is considering fresh sanctions. And in Rome, the fourth annual Ukraine Recovery Conference is underway, with the leaders of Germany, Italy, Poland and the Netherlands among those in attendance, together with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Well, Olga Tokariuk is a Ukrainian journalist, regular Monocle contributor, and joins us from the Ukraine Recovery Conference in Rome. Olga, thanks for joining us from the conference. First off, though, what can you tell us about these latest strikes on Ukraine overnight?
Hello, Chris, and thank you for having me. So, again, this night, Ukraine was heavily attacked by Russian missiles and drones. President Zelensky spoke about it in his opening speech here at the Ukraine Recovery Conference in Rome. He said that 18 missiles and 400 drones were launched on Ukraine overnight. It was a 10-hour-long strike that killed 2 people and injured 19 in Kyiv. And, you know, it was more than Kyiv. Many Ukrainian cities were attacked. Even in the west of Ukraine, Chernivtsi, where I have family members, for the first time, they've heard a sound of a Russian drone over, that quite far part of Ukraine bordering Romania that was taken down eventually. But that just shows you that Russia is escalating its air attacks, that it is expanding the area of these attacks as well.
Olga, that is quite striking. I know I remember visiting Chernivtsi with you when we were in Ukraine, and it did feel quiet at that time. It does suggest a change, and I mean, Donald Trump has spoken about this change as well, or at least he's suggested he's frustrated with Putin for some of these strikes. He's also spoken with Volodymyr Zelensky in recent days, and we understand Zelensky met this morning in Rome with the U.S. envoy, Keith Kellogg. Is there a bit of a different air in these meetings right now?
Yes, so Zelensky met with the head of the U.S. delegation, Ukraine envoy Keith Kellogg, and they discussed the need for air defense. So there have been, as you said, some encouraging signs, some encouraging statements, although they were quite vague coming from the U.S. President Trump in recent days about that, maybe the U.S. will be ready to send Ukraine additional Patriot missile defense systems, something that Ukraine really badly needs. We also know that some of the U.S. weapon supplies have resumed. So the U.S. confirmed they will be sending to Ukraine 155 millimeter artillery shells and also some GMLRS rocket launchers. So hopefully, there is hope here in Rome that more is on the way, that air defense will be provided. And this is, again, something that President Zelensky stressed in his opening speech. He said Ukraine needs air defense. Russia uses terror and cold to try to subjugate Ukraine. Ukraine is looking ahead towards winter. It has to prepare. It has to, be sure that it can protect its civilians. So President Zelensky called here for a creation of so-called recovery coalition to help Ukraine prepare, to defend itself more and also prepare for the winter and be able to rebuild itself.
Well, Olga, speaking of that recovery coalition, as Zelensky is calling it, there are a number of European leaders there in support in Rome. Giorgia Meloni, Friedrich Merz, Donald Tusk. What is Zelensky expecting of those leaders?
Well, I think he made it pretty clear in his address. So he started by mentioning this overnight attack. He spoke about the need of the air defense. And then he spoke about this recovery coalition. He stressed that it's not just in Ukraine's interest, it's in the interest of wider European global security. He also said that Ukraine has a lot to offer, that Ukraine has, for example, very developed drone technology that it is willing to share with other countries. And Zelensky also said, and something that he really stressed, that Ukraine expects, Russian frozen assets to be used for Ukraine's recovery. Currently, as we know, only the interest from these assets is being transferred to support Ukraine, but not the assets themselves. So Zelensky, I think, is kind of trying to persuade European leaders who are reluctant to use these frozen assets for all sorts of different reasons to transfer them to Ukraine. And then another kind of thing that I think Ukraine expects is more pressure on Russia and more sanctions. So he spoke about this with Kyiv, the U.S. envoy. We know that there is a bill sitting in the U.S. Congress about, increasing, further toughening sanctions on Russia that has been drafted by Senator Graham, but it hasn't been passed yet. President Trump has been reluctant so far to talk about more sanctions on Russia, but hopefully, with this welcoming signs coming in the recent days, in recent hours even from the U.S. administration, maybe there is a window of opportunity to get that sanctions package approved as well.
Just finally, Olga, you mentioned the ongoing issue of unfreezing Russian assets in terms of helping Ukraine rebuild. The other aspect that has happened this year ahead of this recovery conference is the minerals deal with the United States. I'm curious how that's impacting the conference. How is Ukraine kind of using that deal with the United States to pull investors, to pull potential partners into Ukraine?
Yeah, well, I think it is not, mentioned as much as maybe it should be. Although Ukrainian officials are stressing, that that Ukraine is ready for cooperation, and using this example of the minerals deals, to demonstrate that Ukraine's readiness. I think it's actually the U.S. side that is not mentioning it as much as maybe many people would have expected. But definitely, there are a lot of side events as well happening on Ukraine's defense tech. With Ukrainian companies are trying to forge contacts with military defense companies in other countries of Europe and outside of Europe to kind of show that Ukraine is not just the recipient of aid. Ukraine is not just the country that needs support, but it's also the country that has a lot to offer, that has innovation, that has this very high-tech solutions when it comes to drones and, when it comes to modern warfare. And Ukraine is trying to persuade the investors that they actually will gain a lot from coming to Ukraine and getting that knowledge and cooperating with Ukrainian businesses on that.
Olga, thank you very much for joining us. That was Olga Tokarczuk, Ukrainian journalist in Rome at the Ukraine Recovery Conference. And now here's Tom Webb with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. China says that President Donald Trump's 50% levy on copper is arbitrary. Copper demand has surged in recent years as the world transitions to cleaner energy, with the metal needed for solar panels, wind turbines and electric vehicle batteries. Forecasts suggest that global copper consumption will increase by more than 25% in 10 years. Taiwan has launched its largest ever military drills to train against Chinese threats to invade. The 10-day live-fire exercises are the longest in the country's history, including managing cyber attacks and misinformation campaigns. The early stages of the drills are focused on how to manage a crippling communications attack. South Korean rapper G-Dragon's world tour stop in Bangkok has been cancelled. It comes amid growing frustration among fans over the disorganised rollout of the singer's highly anticipated comeback tour. Concert goers have been criticising the choice of small venues, outdoor shows during rainy season, and poor communication over ticket sales. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Tom. Now, ahead of these drills from Taiwan that you just heard about in the headlines, earlier this week, China activated a new flight route in the Taiwan Strait, running along a west-to-east civilian flight path and passing near Taiwan's territory. The decision was made without consultation with Taiwan, and it gives Taiwanese air traffic controllers just about 30 seconds to respond if any aircraft for any reason deviate from their prescribed route and enter Taiwan's airspace, raising both safety concerns and tensions over Taiwan's sovereignty. Well, I'm joined now by Brian Hyo, the founding editor of New Bloom magazine. Brian, thanks for coming back on the show. This is not the first time that China has launched a route like this before, but tell us a bit of the background here. What is problematic for Taiwan about China establishing these kinds of flight routes?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is not the first time it's happened. It happened in 2015, it happened in 2018, in 2024, and now this year. In one way, this is an attempt to stress territorial claims over Taiwan by disregarding Taiwan and then having Chinese planes potentially enter Taiwan's airspace when needed. And this also potentially then blurs the lines between what could be a military danger to Taiwan and civilian aircraft. Because as you mentioned, air traffic controllers have a limited time to respond. And so at a time in which there are already incursions into Taiwan's airspace by Chinese fighter jets, this is concerning.
Tell us more about that specifically, the blurring of the lines, as you call it there, because this is a civilian flight route. But as you say, it does still impact military tensions in the Taiwan Strait as well.
That's right, because particularly one of the fears in Taiwan is that if an incident were to occur, for example, this would give China a pretext for military action. Fears are that this would be similar to Ukraine, building up a justification to take eventual military action. But then also there's the fear that China will use a civilian cover for military action. There's already the blurring of the line with regards to maritime activity. In a hypothetical invasion, for example, there could be the use of civilian vessels. There are already also cases of Chinese fishing vessels intruding in Taiwanese territorial waters or otherwise engaged in activity. And some of this is also considered a form of gray zone warfare, blurring the lines between civilian and military activity.
And to that point then, how is Taiwan reacting to this? How is it preparing for this? It is launching these major drills at the moment. Is that something where it's also kind of incorporating this kind of blurring of the lines between civilian and military action possibilities?
So it's thought the announcing of this flight route may in fact be timed to be close to the drills. And it is also thought that China will carry out a set of military drills later this month, again, to register displeasure, because there's currently a set of electoral recalls in Taiwan that are a de facto election, in fact. And so that will lead to this attempt to pressure Taiwan politically. But in this sense, I think the timing is sensitive, and Taiwan will seek to register complaints, I think, internationally. But then China is really trying to draw a line here.
Tell us more about those complaints internationally. I do understand that one option is to go to the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, but Taiwan is not currently a member. What kind of recourse does it have?
So Taiwan has long sought admission to the ICAO, citing that the large number of air traffic that passed through Taiwan, claiming this is dangerous to civilian aircraft safety. And yet Taiwan denied because it's not part of the UN. It's unlikely that Taiwan would be able to do that without pressure from major countries in the UN. Historically, the US, so the US is less involved these days. And so it is a question. I mean, Taiwan's options, I think, are limited to raising it with allies. Though it may raise the exclusion from the ICAO, inclusion is unlikely.
And Brian, just tell us a little about the mood in Taiwan at the moment with this shift in the airspace, the new flight routes, but also these drills that are starting again, given that these are among the biggest that have ever happened. How is that impacting the mood in Taiwan right now?
For the most part, life continues as usual. Taiwan usually does not panic with regards to Chinese military threats because they've been going on so long. But that being said, there is increased awareness of Chinese threats. For example, something that also happened not too long ago was there was a typhoon, and that led to Chinese civilian aircraft passing over Jingmen, one of Taiwan's outlying islands. And people noticed and asked questions of the government, was this a form of gray zone activity? And the government responded, the Taiwanese government, that this was just an emergency measure because of the typhoon. And this is, in fact, an example of positive cooperation between both sides. But that there is this concern that planes passing over an island of Taiwan could be Chinese activity. That does show this level of elevated concern that is rising, I think.
And just finally, Brian, I mean, does this impact Taiwan's own airspace? Does it impact flights from Taiwan to other places as well?
It occurs at a distance, but the question is that when it comes to airspace, we're dealing with relatively fast-moving objects. And so there is a limited amount of time to respond to threats. And in this sense, when there are incursions in the communication zone by Chinese warplanes, that is not visible from Taiwan itself. It still occurs at a distance from Taiwan. But you do, for example, if you're on Taiwan's east coast or elsewhere, see the fighter jets that are deployed to intercept and prevent mishaps from happening, let's say. And so it is a way of constraining Taiwan, but the general public doesn't always perceive it. I think it's on other factors that lead to a greater sense of political threat.
Brian Yeo, founding editor of New Bloom magazine, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing. I'm Chris Chermak. The Goodwood Festival of Speed begins today, known for its hill climb. The event has been running for more than 30 years and it pays homage to the most significant and salient cars in the history of international motorsport. Well, Nicholas Biebeck is Heritage Director of the Swiss brand Tag Heuer and a sponsor of the event. Joins me right here in the studio. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chris. Pleasure to be here.
It's good to have you. Tell us, first of all, why you're excited about this festival. What is it about the Goodwood Festival of Speed?
I mean, it's really a magical celebration of automotive culture. I was lucky enough to attend as a child in the mid-1990s, so 30 years ago now. And
when it started, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. Very close to the beginning. It was a slightly different event at the time, but it really fostered my great love of cars and, of course, eventually watches as well as mechanical objects. And I think it's easy to see cars as this kind of cold, hard lump of metal. But of course, there is an emotion, there's a personality, and there's incredible individuals around it. And to be inspired and to witness that firsthand at Goodwood is really a very special thing.
So how does Goodwood bring that out? What are you excited for when you look at, say, this year's event?
I think the fantastic thing really is the breadth of automotive culture that they can celebrate there. Of course, this year is the 75th anniversary of Formula One, so they have a dedicated paddock to celebrate this. But there's also the rally stages, other important historic racing cars. But beyond that, many of the modern brands use it as a platform to debut new cars and celebrate that side of the culture as well. So we have every possible vertical that you can imagine all being celebrated together, and it's a great unifying event for the industry.
There's a unifying event of cars and watches, for that matter, all kinds of brand stuff. I know you're going to be launching a new watch as well, but before that, just tell us, Tag Heuer is the timekeeper. What does that mean? What does that entail?
So of course, Goodwood, it's a relatively competitive environment. Of course, there's demonstration runs up the hill, but you have this incredible driveway, as it was historically, that goes past Goodwood House. And as the timekeeper, we're there to make sure whoever's got the fastest lap, we can record that and award them at the end of the weekend.
And what ties Tag Heuer to racing? Is it just about the timekeeping? Why are you returning to this event?
It's much deeper than that. Of course, there's many watch brands who want to talk about a connection to motorsport and automotive culture, but the reality is there's one brand. So of course, I'm slightly biased, but the reality is we're the only one that can really say across decades, since almost the birth of the motoring industry, Tag Heuer has been present at every step of the way, supporting the most important teams, the most celebrated drivers. We've been there every step along the way. And not just for watches on the wrist and logos on the screen, but as a technical partner, as a timekeeping partner. And
just tell us a little more about that. Why is it important to Tag Heuer? Why does it matter to link motorsports with timekeeping and watches?
It's such an important part of our DNA. When you imagine that we were a technical partner of Scuderia Ferrari in the 1970s, we were there with Ayrton Senna and McLaren throughout the 1980s. today, of course, with Red Bull Racing as well. Alongside that, many stories around Porsche, of course, the connection to Steve McQueen and the filming of the movie Le Mans, the great icons of the sport who have worn our watches. You can see that we really own this discipline, and it's very important to remind the world that really there is one brand that's a specialist in automotive culture, the chronograph as a complication, and timekeeping, and that is Tag Heuer. So to be able to support at every level of the discipline, from Formula One at the very top to, Goodwood and events at a more grassroots and, inspiring and inclusive level, is super important for us.
And you are going to be launching a new Carrera watch as well. Tell us about that.
Yes, we've produced a very limited edition of watches. I think it's 100 pieces in total that we're going to be producing to celebrate this return to Goodwood Festival of Speed. It's based on our Carrera Timeless collection with a Goodwood green dial and a few codes that play into that. So the Carrera is one of our great iconic collections, of course synonymous with motorsport, being named after the Carrera Panamericana road race. Today, one of the icons of the watchmaking industry, so it was only natural for us to choose this collection.
Just finally, Nicholas, are you surprised by how big motorsports has become? It feels like the F1 has been having its moment where there's the Netflix series, whatever started it, it's like suddenly it's become this international thing in a way that it probably wasn't before.
Absolutely. I mean, when I first started going to motor racing when I was a child in the mid-1990s, it was older European gentlemen, and there was very little, shall we say, cultural
Maybe
diversity.
A few Latin Americans as well.
A few, but on the European circuit it was quite limited. Global travel wasn't quite the same as it is today. But it was wonderful for me to hear stories of friends whose nieces are going to Silverstone last weekend as a group, and I was fortunate to be at Monaco and Imola races in May, and to see the age range, the men and women, which is actually a very novel concept in motorsport. A mixture of cultural identities as well. It's just amazing that so many people are now feeling that they can be a part of the sport as well. And I think the work that's been done to open it up to more people and to really talk about the codes that are universal, this sense of physical performance, mental resilience, teamwork, and of course success at the end of the day. These are the stories that we can tell through motorsport.
And what does that do for a brand as well? Does it make you think differently about how to advertise and kind of how to focus when motorsport is expanding in this way, different markets?
Absolutely. Of course, the watchmaking industry historically was, very male dominant. Of course, now as it's opened up, of course, there's, another 50% of the market that we can appeal to as well. And a lot of that comes down to product creation, our choice of colours, how we create product that's universal. This is really exciting. And of course, sizing is a major topic at the moment, as we see the move away from ginormous watches 10, 15 years ago to something that's more elegant and wearable. You see many more watches below 40 millimeters now because they have this universal presence on the wrist. So it's exciting for us. And as you say, marketing communication, it's a whole nother story as well. Of course, we need to create a message that resonates with as many people as possible.
Nicholas Biebeck, Tag Heuer Heritage Director, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And finally, on today's show, what could it possibly be other than the global countdown, given we just played the jingle? Fernando Augusto Pacheco, Monocle's senior correspondent, is here. Buongiorno, Fernando.
Buongiorno, Chris. Let's talk in Italian, one of the most beautiful languages in the world.
We are, and you are about to head to Italy. So it's not that this is a special global countdown. It's kind of returned to regular form. But, in honor of your trip, a little vacation to Italy, why not talk about a beautiful country, beautiful people, beautiful language, music?
Yes, beautiful music. I'm heading to Puglia straight after this, Chris. But for now, let's look what I will be listening in the discotheques in Puglia.
In the discotheques.
I love saying this word, discotheques.
You just want to say discotheques.
Yes.
Okay, yes. Let's hear what you're going to... What kind of style is going to be in the discotheques? Are these all discotheque-style songs? I'm just going to keep saying the word for you.
In fact, not quite. We're starting at number 5 with some rock and roll. And Italians do have a penchant for rock. It's one of the few countries where actually the genre does, top the charts quite frequently.
Maneskin, of course, topped Eurovision. So
absolutely.
Yes.
And many others, including this band we're about to hear, they are big in Italy and they have quite a funny name. Pinguini Tattici Nucleari, which translating tactical nuclear penguins, featuring Max Pezzali with Bottiglie Vuote, empty bottles.
Portarti al mare alle 4 di notte, quando tutti dormono tranne le onde, stare a guardare
tactical nuclear penguins.
Yeah.
There's got to be some origin story to that name.
It's
Fernando.
the best name ever. And weirdly enough, I actually could not find the reason why they chose penguins in the title, but nevertheless,
Focusing on the penguins, not the tactical nuclear penguins.
I was more curious about the penguins, I have to say,
I mean, if it had been tactical nuclear mice, it would have been fine.
Then it would be fine. But penguins, they're quite smart penguins, I would say.
Well,
but
that's why they can handle nuclear warheads.
And the song, it's empty bottles because it's a little bit about, even though it sounded a bit cheery, there's something quite melancholic about it. It's about when your hopes are left adrift in the ocean. That's the thing. The empty bottles they're talking about. It's not that they went,
There's no messages in those bottles. They're
There are
just
no.
empty bottles.
There are no
Very
hopes.
sad. It's
Well,
very sad.
gosh.
But it was a bouncy tune. I could see that in a discotheque, in a certain style of discotheque.
But number 4, that I will be listening to it. And first of all, Chris, I would like to say that in Italy, there's a name for the biggest summer hit of the year. It's the tormentone. So they even have a name for it. So that's why how Italians prize their summer songs. I think this is a contender. Of course, we don't quite know yet which one will be, but this one, that you can dance to. It's Elodie. She's on the Monocle playlist quite frequently. Esfera e Basta and Russian with Yakuza.
Vieni andiamo via, tu e io dalla festa. Stasera sono già le 3, 4, 5, quindi resta da me, ma solo se tu lo vuoi. Malamente sappiamo già cosa dire, la gente su di noi saranno solo maldicenze, sì, però
Very smooth track there. Fernando, you're going to have to report back once you return from Puglia whether that is, so far at least, the summer track of the year.
Well, one thing I can tell you, perhaps not the summer song of Italy, but one of the summer songs globally, comes from Colombia. We've played this song before, but it's one of those tracks that you can't avoid. In fact, I've added this track to the Monocle Summer playlist, which is in the July-August issue. I don't know, I think this beat is infectious, and I think 230 million people that have been seeing the video would agree with me. Shall we head to Colombia, Chris?
So this is number 3. Is it has broken the Italian charts as well as everywhere else?
Yes, it is W Sound with La Plena.
La plena.
It's a good question, Faye. When you said, what was the name for the Italian summer song of the year?
Tormentoni.
Dormentoni. Does Dormentoni have to be Italian?
It kind of does,
Kind
I
of
would
should
say.
be,
But maybe there are two. There's the local one, maybe an international one. And that will be given, of course, to W
Dormentoni
Sound.
Internazionale?
Oui. I don't know why I said we. Si.
Si, Fernando, si.
I do get confused with languages. I'm so sorry, Chris.
French and Italian, they're very close to each other.
Very close. And W Sound is called 05 because W Sound is a producer. But then he does these collaborations with different artists. And that's his 5th collaboration with Belly and Ovi on the drums. So that's why the song is W Sound 05. So it's a bit confusing, but nevertheless.
Nevertheless, it is a good track, and it has broken in because Italy, international songs don't always break in. They have such good songs of their own. Do we have any other international ones as we round out the top 5?
Partially.
Partially,
And number
yeah.
2, and actually, I was talking about summer song. I wrote for the Mediterranean, Monocle Mediterranean newspaper, which is out now in the newsstands and in our website. The songs I think it would be the summer song in different countries in the MAD. This is the one that I picked for Italy. Okay. I'm not too wrong. They're number 2, but it could climb to number 1.
You could. You're going for the number 1. Do you put money on this, Fernando? Is it just your personal list?
Maybe I did put money on it. This is Alpha, an Italian rapper, with Manu Chao. So this song is very nostalgic, and you're going to hear it why. A me mi piace.
Sei luce la mattina, la mia serotonina, mi fa alzare l'autostima, più del mar Mediterraneo, una domenica allo stadio.
Not everyone is a fan because people think they like the original by Manu Chao. So it's a rework of his song Me Gustas Tu. But, they wanted, to give a little refresh, and that's why the song's back in the charts.
Are you a fan of refreshes, Fernando?
I don't mind, if it's for the numbers, do it. If it's for, to maybe there's a young generation who will be like listening to the original now. I mean, to be honest, Manu Chao is still being played all over Europe, even after many...
A lot, yes, we hear that song a lot. But this is a new version, so maybe this will take over for a little bit. It's always interesting to see whether, as time goes on, the new version or the old version gets played more.
But it's hard to predict things, Chris, because summer songs, sometimes they come from nowhere. Well, this, I can't say it's exactly a surprise, because Anna, she's been the youngest artist ever to top the Italian charts in 2020. Now she's 21, so you can imagine how young she was. She's a big name in Italy, and she mixes kind of hip-hop, reggaeton and pop music. And this song is connecting. It's viral on social media. It's Anna with Désolé.
La neve, vuoi fare il loco, ma io sono più loca di te. Non farmi andare in quella modalità, non ti comportare come fossi un bebè. Se ci incontriamo non è casualità, non mi vuoi vedere allora peggio per te. Chiamare un altro però cosa mi dà? Io non chiedo scusa ma sono désolé.
Fernando, your face, we're doing radio here, so I can't quite do justice to it, but you were kind of not really reacting to that one. What's wrong? That was a good track. Can't you imagine that in the discotheque?
Chris, you put me on the spot, naughty you. But yes, not a fan. Sorry, Anna.
Fan.
But I like her. Maybe I like her as a person, It's an interesting song. Did
you like her original from 5 years ago?
I did.
Okay.
That song was quite good. I think it was called Bando. But nothing against Anna. I just maybe Alpha. Elodie is my favorite at number 4.
Elodie's been your favorite for a while, hasn't it?
Exactly.
This is a regular on Monocle's playlist.
Exactly.
As well. Fernando Augusto Pacheco, have a great trip to Puglia. Enjoy the discotheques there as long as you can. Thank you for joining us. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Tom Webb and Ryuma Takahashi. Our researcher was Henry King. Our studio manager was Flynn Simons. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.